Welcome back to the Raw Prospect Podcast, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Emmy Nixon. Today is April 19th. We're recording this at about 11 p.m., just past 11 p.m. And joining me from Austin, Texas, the Stat King himself, Mr. Michael Ween. What's up, man?
I'm feeling good today. I think you can probably tell I'm wearing a pink shirt. Just past Easter. Hope all of you had a great Easter weekend. If you do celebrate Easter or whatever you may celebrate, hope you got good family time, that sort of thing. And we're back for another podcast. Today we will be giving out our prospect of the week. We're going to talk about the NBA playoffs so far and some of the takeaways that we have. And then we will be kicking off, finally, our NFL draft segments. The draft is in 8 days, next Thursday. So we'll probably have this podcast and probably one more before the draft to cover all that stuff. Yeah, it's a fun time in sports, and let's just go ahead and get started. But I want one quick question. Do you know what episode this is? I think we've lost count of what episode this actually is.
I'm counting this as episode 102.
Okay.
Since our last episode was a live stream.
Okay.
Anyways, guys, if you wouldn't mind just leaving a comment down below, just with what you think of the playoffs so far, or with any feedback for us, it would really help us out. It would help with engagement and help recommend our videos to new people. Also, just leave a like down below as well. It only takes a second, and it also helps with engagement, helps with recommending us to new people. So if you could just do those two things, we would really appreciate that. And we'll just get right into this.
Mm-hmm. So prospect of the week, who'd you go with?
Okay, so I actually have two players in mind. I have a homer pick, my Dallas Maverick pick, and you probably have a good idea of who that is if you watched the games yesterday, and my non-homer pick, and I'll start with that one, and that is Jordan Poole. He started out the playoffs absolutely on fire, scoring 30 and 29 respectively on incredible efficiency, and like we said on our playoff preview episode, or like I pointed out, that lineup with him, Steph, and Clay, and Draymond, and whichever forward they want to throw in as that fifth man, whether it be Wiggins or Kuminga or whatever the case may be, that five-man lineup is absolutely incredible. That lineup exploded about midway through the second quarter in Game 2 last night. And I actually went back and looked, and from halfway through the second quarter, they were down by 12. They were down 43-31. And by the end of the third quarter, they had 101 points. So they scored 70 points in a quarter and a half of basketball, which is just mind-blowing. And I just think that team is going to be incredibly to beat. So I had to him out, and I just had to say, they keep on developing these new players. I don't know how they're able to do it quickly, but just like that, they have a new splash brother, splash cousin, whatever you want to call it, just to add in with Stephen Clay, who can shoot from 30 feet, has a handle, step back threes, you name it, passing ability, solid defender. I mean, he's truly a complete player. And so that's really all you can say about him at that point. I mean, I also, if you want to go a little bit deeper into the Warriors, go back and listen to our last episode. We talked about that a lot more. But for my second player, I chose Jalen. And I just wanted to address, as a Mavs fan, what yesterday meant to us as a franchise. I mean, we were down 1-0, home court advantage. And we knew that if we didn't win game 2 at home, this series was pretty much dead in the water. And history tells us that if you go down 0-2 in a series, you're going to lose 93% of the time. And that's even less if you lose home court advantage. So that was just an incredible performance. He was 15 for 25, I think, 41 points, a bunch to start off the game and get us going. And I just think what that meant for our franchise, just being able to have that leeway to rest Luka a little bit more, might make all the difference in terms of going deeper into the playoffs.
Absolutely. Both worthy picks. I did not go the NBA route. However, I did want to give a shout out to Tyrese Maxey, who has been fantastic so far through 2 games for the 76ers. But with all that being said, I did mine similar to you. I have like Homer shout out and then a real prospect of the week. So my Homer shout outs for this week, there's actually 2 of them. Go to 2 UT University of Texas golf team alumni. Scotty Scheffler for, I know, winning the Masters a couple weeks ago. And then this week, back-to-back, Jordan Spieth for winning the RBC Heritage in a playoff over Patrick Cantlay. So that is 2 straight wins for UT golf alumni on the PGA Tour. Won a major, then won the RBC Heritage. And I believe if you count Scheffler's run, that would be 5 of the past 8 PGA tournaments have been won by UT golfers. So just shout out to them for their continued success on the PGA Tour. Scheffler more than Spieth, but good job, Spieth, getting a win this past week in a playoff over Patrick Cantlay. And it's interesting because one last note on Spieth, his last win before this past Sunday, which was Easter Sunday, was last Easter Sunday at the Valero Texas Open. And he won that in a playoff. So he has 2 straight wins on Easter Sunday, both in playoffs. And guess what? If you want to put a little wager down on Jordan Spieth at next year's Masters Sunday next year is Easter. So this trend of him winning on Easter, I'm just saying, like, what's going on here? But good job to Jordan Spieth.
That's it. That's pretty interesting.
But my real prospect of the week, is in baseball. And you probably don't know him, but you're going to know him because he has broken onto the scene coming over this season as a rookie from Japan. Another rookie from Japan that's just come on the scene and absolutely killed it so far. Seiya Suzuki, the right fielder for the Chicago Cubs, has been absolutely fantastic so far. His numbers are insane through 11 games. He has a 429 429 batting average, a 564 on base percentage, and a 1.493 OPS with 4 home runs, 12 stolen bases, 11 RBIs, and a 319 OPS plus, meaning he's 219% better than the average major league hitter so far, which is just mind-blowing. So if you ever get a chance to watch a Cubs game, he's the real draw right now. And he seems to be that one of those generational players, not necessarily on Shohei's level. It's a short sample size, and things are going to change. He'll cool off here at some point and regress to the mean. But I still think with the things he's able to do, the contact he's able to make, the Cubs are sort of in a rebuilding phase right now after, they sold their core players last year at the trade deadline, Rizzo, Bryant, all those guys that were part of that World Series winning team a couple years back. this guy from right here, who they got from Japan, signed to like $100 million contract over the next 5 years, seems to be a building block for them. So good for them. We'll see how he continues as the season moves forward. It's only been about 2 weeks so far. Can't take much from that sample size, but he's off to a really goddamn good start. So just keep an eye out for him throughout the rest of the season. And we'll talk about him more at a later date. So shout outs to Scotty Scheffler and Jordan Spieth for their consecutive victories on the PGA Tour, UT Golf, and Seiya Suzuki for his hot start in the majors.
Okay, yeah, that's a welcome sight to see. We see a ton of young talent. We talked about this before a few podcasts ago. The MLB is just littered with young talent, so good to see. So, with that though, let's get right into this NBA stuff. So, most of the series are 2 games in. So let's start with you first. What is the biggest takeaway just from the one that stood out to you out of all these series in terms of storylines or key factors?
Well, there's a couple. I don't know what the biggest would be. I guess I would say it would probably be that new Warriors death lineup and how devastating that could really be. Seeing that sort of makes me want to change my finals pick. I know you have the Warriors coming out of the West. I personally picked Phoenix, and I'm still feeling pretty good about that. I don't know what they're doing right now against New Orleans, but I do think we're going to get that Western Conference Finals. I sure hope so. What Jordan Poole's able to do, the just continued dominance of that lineup, I think has to be the biggest takeaway, and how dominant they look. And Draymond Green's, I thought Draymond Green, because he didn't play any of the 4 regular season matchups against Denver, I thought he would make a difference playing in the series, but I did not think it would be this big of a difference. When guarded by Draymond, Jokic is currently shooting in the series 32% on 28 shot attempts. I did not think he would be able to have this big of an effect. Maybe it's big. Maybe it's, maybe I'm overplaying it, but he's been absolutely fantastic defensively for them. And of course, the others, with Steph coming back, the accepting of the roles with him coming off the bench in game 1 and letting Jordan Poole, since he's been playing well over the past month or 2, start. Klay Thompson looks good. Just everybody seems to look really good, and that team looks really dangerous. That's probably the number one takeaway I have so far. I think Denver's cooked. Jokic doesn't have much at all help unless we get a surprise return from Jamal Murray or Michael Porter Jr. That series looks over to me. Denver will probably get a game because it's hard to win there, but I do think the Warriors are just the far superior team. Did you want to chime in real fast?
I want to add that it's the worst scenario matchup for Denver with the way their team is set up. They want to be able to have Jokic in drop coverage, and he's developed into a pretty good drop coverage big. But in terms of playing the Warriors, you have to show on screens because they have Curry and Thompson and Jordan Poole, the third player in that lineup, just to add another threat on top of what they already had. Is just incredible shooting on the floor, and they're just getting spread out, and that spread offense in a way is causing all of these cutters to have an open lane to cut through. And if you're not completely disciplined and on it, it's just a nightmare to cover. It's just almost impossible to cover everything at once, especially when that death lineup is on the floor. And
Right.
I've seen a lot of takes on Twitter about blaming Jokic and saying, like, how can he be the MVP when he can't even dominate 6'6", blah, 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 6'6" guy. But number one, Draymond is one of the best defenders ever, maybe the best defender of this generation. And number two, I mean, you could put any star into this situation with two of the best players out, and I feel like the narrative would be different. I just feel like there's some sort of vendetta against Jokic for some particular reason, in terms of not being able to give him the benefit of the doubt.
Right. Yeah, so that's a storyline to watch, especially as Steph becomes more acclimated in his return. But he looked great yesterday. So after a subpar game one. But anyways, the one thing that's really surprised me has been this Sixers Raptors series that I thought was going to be far more competitive than it has been so far. And things can change. I understand that with the shifting of the series to Toronto. That is a tough place to play. And they're not going to have Matisse Thybulle when they go up there. And we did say on the preview podcast that we both thought it was somewhat important for Philly to win these first two games before they go up to Toronto, because they would be missing Matisse Thybulle, and give them credit. They have done that. But at the end of the day, Toronto to me just does not have the go-to guy that they need. They're kind of lacking that go-to scoring punch. They just don't have enough firepower. And Tyrese Maxey, I mean, he's been like, you couldn't ask for a better showing from him through these first two games so far. Toronto in the regular season, when they did have success against Philly, they thrived on forcing turnovers, getting in transition. They were, in fact, third during the regular season in fast break points per game. They forced more turnovers than any team in the NBA. They had they were a great offensive rebounding team, creating second chance points. They ranked second in both of those categories. They were just kind of your regular season, give effort every single night team. And now playoffs have come. The game has slowed down. The intensity has ramped. It's higher now every single possession. And the Sixers team is just, things can change, but they look really good so far in the first two games. So I do think that series will probably end up being not going past 6. I think the way Philly's playing right now, unless something drastic changes. I mean, Toronto, they're dealing with some injuries and some sicknesses right now. I believe Gary Trent has been hindered by a non-COVID illness, and now Scotty Barnes is hurt with that severe ankle sprain. A couple other things have been going on with that team. I just think it's going to be a much shorter and less competitive series than we all thought it would be. So that's another takeaway.
Right.
And then I guess Miami. I didn't think Atlanta was going to give them much trouble anyways, but they look like just your typical Miami team. Play defense, good defensive versatility. They can switch everything. Bam Adebayo was an absolute defensive menace in game one, switching those screens, not allowing Trae Young to penetrate. Jimmy Butler tonight goes for 45. They look really good so far. So those are
Right.
the
And
three things.
one thing I'll say about that.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Just one thing I wanted to say about that Philly series is Toronto is just struggling to score. That's the biggest thing. That's keeping them from setting their half. That's the biggest key to me. me is the fact that they're just struggling to score the. And then number two is these Philly shooters are hitting their shots. Then huge, just like we said in the preview, they're to sinking down into the Joel Embiid post and give them credit. I mean, they've hit them at a extremely high. I mean, just Tyrese Maxey, who you mentioned earlier, it's Tobias. So obviously, there's still questions about the depth. But if Toronto is going to have any hope about the shooting of Philadelphia, because they can't off the 3-point. They have to sacrifice a little bit of the double teaming on Joel Embiid a little bit. So I think you force James Harden to score a little bit more. He's been averaging like 10 to 12 assists these first couple of games. You force him to go into ISO mode, and it's just make or miss after that.
Right. A couple more things I wanted to say about that Toronto and Philly series. You're absolutely right. Toronto just lacks the scoring punch required to compete so far. But the number one thing I wanted to say was, or a couple things, I guess. Number one, as opposed to the history between these two teams, the Sixers have had success so far, or at least better success, when Embiid has been on the bench. In the minutes that Embiid has been resting so far through 2 games, they're plus 12 in 22 minutes. Now, if you want to go all the way back to the 2019 Eastern Conference semifinals, in that series, the series that they lost to the Raptors, and I know it was different rosters and different roster constructions, but in that series, Philadelphia was outscored by 109 points in the 99 minutes that Joel Embiid sat on the bench in that series. So a drastic difference. Number two, as I mentioned earlier, the Sixers are taking care of the ball. They're only turning it over on 10.5% of their offensive possessions. The Raptors force turnovers on 16, close to 17% of opponents' possessions. So they're doing a fairly good job of taking care of the ball. And they're also doing a good job of controlling the defensive glass. They're limiting Toronto to offensive rebounds on only 27% of its misses. They were able to rebound 33% of their misses during the regular season, as they were one of the top offensive rebounding teams. So that's helped them as well. And then another thing that I've noticed just watching the game is Philly seems to consistently find good offensive looks when Harden and Maxey screen for each other. It just gives them, it allows Harden to hunt the right switch on the smaller defenders, Gary Trent, Van Vliet, and it gives Maxey the flexibility to sort of move around and explode through gaps in the coverages. So they've had some really good offensive success when those two guys play together and sort of screen for each other. So Philly's doing everything they need to do to expose, I guess, Toronto's weaknesses and also neutralize their strengths, if that makes any sense.
Right, exactly. And yeah, that's just the matchups have really been all won by Philly in every sense of the word. And you really highlighted that with everything you just said there. But let's just go series by we already cut Warriors. So let's keep it out east for now. What do you think of this Bucks Bulls series so far? Obviously, game 1 didn't really go the way most people thought it would. It was more of a low affair. there. So what did you take away from that game?
Well, number one, the Bulls stars, DeRozan and Levine in particular, did not shoot the ball well. And they were still had a chance to win that game. So that's a good sign if you're a Bulls fan. I believe DeRozan shot like 6 for 25. I don't know what Levine's shooting numbers were, but they weren't great either. They were just really inefficient, not able to convert good looks on the offensive end. And some of that was in part to Milwaukee's defense, but at the same time, you got to make some of those shots that they were missing if you want to beat a really good team like Milwaukee. Number two, I thought Brook Lopez had an indelible impact on that game, ability to make shots and dominate inside. I thought he was a big factor. And I think just Chicago in a game like that really missed what a guy like Lonzo Ball would have been able to do in his facilitating abilities, his defensive abilities, make it a little bit easier on DeRozan and Levine to get good shots. Those were my main, and Giannis is just an absolute freak once again. So those were my main takeaways from game one of that series. I do think that series it's going to be hard for Chicago to take that series past game 6, in my opinion. But I don't know. Things can change. Things can change quick. But I do think Milwaukee will end up winning that series fairly quickly. I just think it's a bad matchup.
And you mentioned it. Yeah, you mentioned right where I wanted to go with this, facilitating. What Lonzo Ball can bring in terms of passing the ball, moving the ball around. Milwaukee gives up 17 wide open threes per game, by far the most in the league. Actually, I believe it's actually higher than that. I think it's around 20 in that range. And so one of the things that I was looking at going in is, would Chicago be able to take advantage of that, since they're not typically a team who takes a lot of threes? And, give them credit because they took a lot of them. They had open looks. But one thing that I saw is Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan weren't making the reads in terms of playmaking, getting it to these shooters. Because if you're going to beat the Bucks, you've got to make those passes to the opposite corner or opposite wing or whatever the case may be, because those type of passes stretch out the defense. And if you end up making those shots, that's what's going to open up looks for yourself as well. So those two guys were really looking to score and then pass, and it has to be the opposite. It's got to be, they got to look, facilitate, get themselves established in the game, get the defense spread out a little bit, and then once that's established, then they can look to attack.
Right. You hit it right on the head. I think we covered pretty much everything there. So let's move on to Boston and Brooklyn. Man, what a game one. What do you think?
Yeah, it was fantastic. And I believe we both chose Boston to win the series, right?
I believe I chose Boston in 7.
Right. I chose Boston in 7 as well. But whatever the case may be, I just think this series, the game one confirmed everything we thought about the series. It's a battle of two contenders, pretty much. You can argue whether or not Brooklyn is, but these are two fantastic teams nonetheless. So I just think, given the fact that Kevin Durant had such a rough game offensively and defensively, he was turning the ball over. He wasn't shooting the ball all that great. He was kind of lost defensively at certain times. Obviously, on that last play of the game, he actually let Jason Tatum cut because he was ball watching. Different things like that really cost them in this game. And I think Kevin Durant will be better moving forward, and that will bode well for Brooklyn. One thing I do want to say, though, is it seemed like Kevin Durant was insisting upon guarding Jason Tatum. And I don't think that's the right move. I think Brooklyn is much better off having Kevin Durant guarding someone in the corners so that he can be more of a help defender. Because with the Nets lineups, they're really lacking in size to begin with. So they really need Kevin Durant down there on that back line. Since they're already double teaming Jason Tatum on the catch anyway, I think you can get away with a little bit of a lesser defender on ball in those situations, because you sacrifice a lot if you're putting Kevin Durant on the ball. You're not really going to have much on that back line. You're going to have Mills, guys like that who are severely undersized, and that would really compromise their defense. Another thing, Boston's offense really collapsed in that fourth quarter. Other than a few miscues here and there, obviously there was that free throw that Nick Claxton shot. He missed it, and then Jaylen Brown got on a run out and had an easy layup. Little things like that in the fourth quarter were the things that allowed Boston to keep scoring here and there. But overall, in the half court, they really struggled to score. And that's really when the thoughts of, oh, wow, this is how they've been losing their close games. They've been struggling with their fourth quarter offense. But they were able to pull this one out. But moving forward, they've got to address that. You got to do something about that. Whether getting pin downs for Tatum or Brown or something, they got to figure out a way to manufacture easy offense in these four.
At the end of the day, for me, and you're absolutely right, it just came down to the reason the Nets lost this game was because poor execution the last couple possessions. I mean, that, in my opinion, was a terrible shot to take from KD. I mean, if there's anybody who could make that shot, it'd probably be him, because he's just such a fantastic offensive talent. But to me, that was a bad possession, bad shot to take in that situation. They could have set a screen or ran something. But, when you have Kyrie and you have KD, it's usually just, let them go to work. To me, it was just poor execution down the stretch from Brooklyn, which was surprising because I did mention all those stats in our preview about how, Boston had really struggled in these type of games, these clutch time games with the score within 5 points, under 5 minutes in the last, in regulation and overtime. Boston was 13-22 in those such games. And they found a way to win this game. Give them credit. They were calm and composed for the most part on that last possession. And give credit to Tatum and who hit him on the pass? I forget.
Marcus
Smart. Give credit to Marcus Smart for being aware in that situation and finding him on the pass to get the lay-in at the buzzer. Give them credit for that. But as I said on the preview, the more games that are like this in this series, and the longer this series goes, the more I worry about Boston. Because, as you said, I just don't think Kevin Durant is going to struggle like that again. And with Kyrie Irving locked in the way he is, at least on the court, off the court's another story, but on the court, I worry about that for Boston the longer this series drags out. So, yes, half-court offense in the fourth quarter and execution down the stretch. If these games are close, the longer this series go, the more I lean towards Brooklyn, just because of their offensive wizardry by those two players, Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving.
Exactly. Right, exactly. And I do have to mention, it would be wrong to go without saying that was unbelievable in that set. I mean, the shot making. We already knew that Kyrie was capable of this. He's done it many times before. But one thing I do want to say, you said, when he's locked like this, we've seen it over and over again. when he's locked in, it's normally 3-4 games in a series in a row locked in completely. He's had all-time stretches of scoring in the playoffs before. So keep an eye out on that. I think if he's in that mode, it could be trouble for Boston. It could mean 3-4 games like this.
Right. And, you know, we'll find out. I'm super excited to watch game 2 tomorrow. But yeah, I just think even with the storylines of Ben Simmons possibly coming back in like a game 4 or game 5, if Boston doesn't capitalize on this opportunity now, along with all those other factors, even if Ben Simmons just gives them 10 minutes of defense, like solid defense, it could be real trouble for Boston. But I still am going to lean. I'm still going to stick with my pick, Boston. I just think they're, at the end of the day, they're the better coach team. And I just think they got the better chemistry and they'll find a way to win because they've done that all season. But Brooklyn's dangerous.
Exactly.
They're dangerous.
Exactly. Right. There's a reason why a lot of people this game to go to pick the series to go to 7. So that does it for the East. Now let's move over to the West, not the rest. Oh my gosh. Can't talk today. But let's address this Mavericks Jazz series real quick. I guess I'll start off. I was actually at game 1, and the thing I took away from that game is it was overwhelmingly positive, Mavericks' point of view, because we didn't hit our shots. I mean, we had the open looks over and over again. Guys got into the lane, found the guys on the perimeter, and falling. I mean, that's really all there was to it. We were in it we only lost by 6, and our defense kept us in. Why I felt good going into game 2. And then game 2, obviously, those shots that weren't falling in game 1, they all went in game 2. And that really made all the difference. From a Jazz perspective, is really a lot more interesting, in my opinion, because they've got to make some sort of adjustment. They can't keep going through this cycle of getting this 5-out offense where they just get cooked, basically. Same story. Last year, the 5-out, and then Terrence Mann had that huge game. Gobert was guarding him. He had to help off of those dribble drives, and then they would just kick it out straight to him, and then nobody would rotate. Same thing tonight, or same thing yesterday. Maxi Kleber, Gobert was guarding him. Gobert would help on those dribble drives, and nobody would rotate over, and he just hit his shots. That's all there. It was really simple off, and like there's no reason for a simple drive and kick to get that wide open over, and there's no reason for it. There's no excuses.
Right. I totally agree with you. For me, yeah, it comes down to making adjustments for Utah. We've seen this over and over and over again. And as I said on the preview, it'd be if Luka does not play in the series, it would be inexcusable for them to lose this series. I thought they should have won both games in Dallas, but Dallas, give credit to Dallas. They did a great job making their shots. The shots that didn't fall in game 1 fell in game 2. Maxi Kleber made some huge shots down the stretch of that game. So did Jalen Brunson. And, now you're going back tied 1-1. And I don't know what Luka's status is right now. But, if he comes back later in the series and there's still, light at the end of the tunnel for Dallas, Utah's in big trouble, in my opinion. Game 1, it surprised me that Donovan Mitchell wasn't super aggressive early, but he did. He was in the second half, and he was pretty good in that second half. I don't know, man. I just seen this too many times with the Jazz, and I'm really worried that if this to me the interesting storyline in Utah is what's going to happen after this. I mean, what like do they blow it all up? I think they have to if they don't get out of this series, much less get to the Western Conference Finals, which is what they should do. But I don't think that's going to happen either. So,
right, and they've got to get perimeter defenders. Like, even with just one or two more perimeter defenders, this is an entirely different game because Jalen Brunson and Spencer Dinwiddie are not, I mean, all due respect to them, but they're not high-level ball handlers. They're not Kyrie Irving. They're not Luka Doncic. They're not, you name it, right? And they're just breaking out the defense with ease, just simple crossover, and they're in the lane. And from there, you're just at the mercy of the offense, and that just can't happen. So I think it's up to personnel. I think it just goes down to personnel. I think Mike Conley isn't the same defender he used to be. Mitchell hasn't been good defensively either. Bogdanovich, O'Neal has been decent, but even their best perimeter defender is just above average at best. So it's.
But see,
Not good.
there lies the problem. We've been saying that for a couple of years now. They need perimeter defense, and they haven't been able to get that for some reason. So I don't know what's going on.
Makes no sense. Yeah, it's interesting.
What are we?
Okay,
Minnesota and Memphis.
I think
That's the last series
two
more to talk about. Yeah,
right. There's two more series to talk about.
I mean,
go ahead.
Memphis and Minnesota to me is really the more intriguing one.
But New Orleans just won tonight. I don't know if they knew. I just got the notification. They just tied up the series. Yes, I agree with you 100%. Memphis and Minnesota is definitely the one that you see game one, the way that game went. People really raised their eyebrows like, okay, like this is an interesting matchup. And really, it was interesting to see some of the adjustments that Taylor Jenkins went with in game two. I believe Steven Adams only played 5 minutes in game two. Game one, he played big minutes, guarding Karl-Anthony Towns tonight. Tonight, he went mostly with Jaren Jackson Jr., and that made a world of a difference. It really did. Karl-Anthony Towns couldn't get to his spots the same way. The quickness of Jaren Jackson, as well as really functional strength as well. He's a very wiry dude, but he also has functional strength to be able to hold his spot defensively. And it was a really impressive defensive performance from the Grizzlies, just like all over, not just Jaren Jackson. It was everybody. You could tell that they bought in, and the sense of urgency was there. So if they can keep that up, I still see this as their series to lose. But now that they don't have home court advantage, it's going to be a challenge, definitely. We saw Minnesota in that playing game. That crowd was incredible. And if that same type of energy is there in game three, it's going to be a tough place to win.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you look at some of the metrics that were out from game one. The shot quality that Memphis got was a lot better than the shot quality that Minnesota generated. It's just Minnesota made a lot of those tough shots, and Memphis missed a lot of those should make shots. And that's something that I ultimately, worried about with this Memphis team is they weren't a great shooting team during the regular season. But give credit to Taylor Jenkins, a candidate for Coach of the Year. He made the proper adjustments, went with Jaren Jackson Jr. on Karl-Anthony Towns, and give credit to Karl-Anthony Towns for ultimately having a bounce back game in that game one after, not such a great game in the playing game. But anyways,
Right.
Yeah, I do agree with you. I think this is still Memphis's series to lose. I do think they're probably going to win in about 6 games. But that Anthony Edwards guy, he's a bad, what? Um, he's
Yeah.
we're going to be talking about him a lot for years and years to come. So I don't know. I saw that John Morant got a little banged up tonight. I don't know what the status of him is. Hopefully he's okay. And if he is, I think it's Memphis in 6. Not much else to say.
Right. Right. And there's really not much analysis we have here for all. I mean, it really just comes down to making shots. That's really all it was. Minnesota came out shooting the lights out in game 1, and tonight the exact opposite happened. So really, the team that shoots better from 3 most likely is going to win the game. So that's going to do it for that. The last series just went final tonight is tied 1-1, Suns and Pelicans. What do you think of this first 2 games? I didn't watch most of the second half of game 2, but what are your takeaways so far?
Well, I'm going to be honest. I haven't watched much of this series. I watched Chris Paul's fantastic performance in game 1. And New Orleans just could not, for whatever reason, hit the broadside of a barn, especially during that first half of game 1. I believe they were shooting like below 30% from the field at one point, if I'm not mistaken. And Phoenix, Jay Crowder had the ultimate game with 1 point, 1 rebound, 1 assist, and 1 steal or 1 block, I believe, something like that. And he was his usual self, and they were making shots. Chris Paul was fantastic, 30 points and 10 assists. I still think Phoenix is like the better team. They're going to win this series probably in 5 games, maybe 6 if New Orleans is lucky. I didn't watch much of the game tonight because I was doing homework. I did watch the Minnesota game and I watched the earlier game, but I didn't watch much of the game tonight. So to be honest with you, I can't really speak to that.
But I just got a notification with big news. Devin Booker left the game in the third with a hamstring injury. So that's pretty big. I don't know what this will mean for the series. I don't know what his status is, but what'd you say?
I said that's huge. That's like even if he misses 2 games, that's massive.
Yeah, it really is. And now going into New Orleans, I just think now Phoenix has that slightly less of error, but I still think they're the better team. I just think more falls on Chris Paul now. He has to be more aggressive. Obviously, in stretches, he has been in this series. Last game, he was fantastic in the second half. But also more falls on Mikal Bridges. So I think if they're able to give you good efficiency in their bigger roles, I think they'll be okay because of how good defensively they are.
I agree with you. And they're battle tested. They already went through this playoffs run 1 time last year. Devin Booker injury, that hamstring pull or whatever it was, isn't too serious. And he misses limited time, if that. But of course, I think they could get away with probably had to rest him the rest of the series. They'll win the series because I do trust the ability of Mikal Bridges and DeAndre Ayton to step up and fill that void. And they're a deep roster, so they can withstand this, I think, for this series. But as we move deeper, depending on what that looks like for Devin Booker, it might be smart for them to just rest him the rest of the series if it calls for that, in my opinion.
Yeah, right, exactly. Okay, so that's going to do over our NBA stuff tonight. So now we will get right into our draft content, the first draft segment we've had all year. But before we get into like the main part of this segment, I just want to ask you, what's your feeling on this year's draft class from your impressions, and what can we expect in terms of what positions may go early this year?
I think you're going to see a lot of defense early. Edge rusher is a fairly deep position. I think you're going to see some corners, safeties go up there, and receivers. There are some receiver needy teams in the top 10 and virtually throughout the first round. And with those top guys, you know the names: Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Ohio State guys, Jameson Williams, who's coming off an injury, but he still will probably go middle to late first round if I had to guess. Someone will take a chance on his talents.
Right.
Treylon Burks and others. The receiver class just every year seems to be pretty deep, and it's no different this year. And I do think there are some teams down there in the bottom half of the first round, that may even look to trade up to get one of these receivers. I think we're probably going to see a trade or two up into the top 10, maybe to get a quarterback, but also probably to get a receiver. I do think there are some wide receiver desperate teams that could do that. So the three position groups that stand out to me: the edge rushers, obviously the top edge rushers that we'll talk about here in a minute. Offensive line is pretty solid. And then safeties, corners, I look at that too. And then receivers. I do think we're going to get some action with trades, but we'll save that for a mock draft. What about you?
Right, exactly. I'm right with you there. There's going to be at least one trade to the top 10. It happens every year, but especially this year, I just think there are so many teams down around 16 to 25 that need a quarterback, need a wide receiver, or they just want to ensure that they're getting one of the top talents. And a lot of teams are looking to be aggressive right now. That's really why I'm really excited for next year's NFL season. It's just there's so many teams in a position to where they make the right moves, they can be in a spot where they can win a lot of games. So the parity in the NFL is at a really high spot right now, and this draft will decide a lot. So
and real fast
for this segment, we're just going to go.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Real fast, I just want to do our quick feelings on our teams and what the draft could look like for our specific teams. And we'll get more into this later, but on a later episode. But what is your feel right now with the Cowboys? What's their situation looking like? Just in like 1 or 2 minutes, give a summation of what you feel for this year's Cowboys draft.
With the Cowboys, it's we have a lot of gaps to fill, and really, it really just comes down to their line, or I mean, I wouldn't really be a huge fan of this, but if they were to look at wide receiver, that could be somebody available that falls. I would also look at corner as well, because there's a lot of good corners in this draft also. looking at a guy like Trent McDuffie. I mean, there's a lot of guys there that are pretty intriguing. So, yeah, Zion Johnson, a big guard who was in the Senior Bowl. We talked about him before. I think he was a prospect of the week one week. I don't quite remember. He's a beast. I mean, he could play tackle, really. He has the size to play tackle, but he has the athleticism to be able to play guard. He can reach block. I mean, he's just extremely stout. Man, I didn't really prepare for that.
No, I put you on the spot because I just wanted to get a feel for that.
Yeah, my top two for who I want them to pick is Zion Johnson and Jordan Davis. Those are my top two.
Okay. My feel reading the tea leaves in Pittsburgh is that one of two things is going to happen. Number one is going to be they trade up and they look to be aggressive and they go after their guy Malik Willis. If he drops down far enough to where a trade up would be plausible. I do think reports have said that they are seriously looking into that. And I do think even then they could trade up for another quarterback or even trade back into the second round and take a guy like Desmond Ridder there. A guy that you're probably not going to reach for in the first round, but you're probably okay taking in the second round. Regardless, I do think they're taking a quarterback, whoever that is, whether it's trading up into possibly near the top to get their guy like a Malik Willis or Kenny Pickett, or trading back into the second round and taking a guy like, I don't know, Sam Howell or Desmond Ridder. I do hear they really like Desmond Ridder, some of the things he can do. And I do think if quarterback doesn't work out for them, I do think there's a strong possibility that they are taking a receiver in round one. They might even trade up for that guy if they see that guy. I do think they fixed a lot of their interior offensive line issues in free agency. If they were to sit still at 20 and a guy like Linderbaum or another guy were to drop to them, I could see them taking it, but I don't think they really feel as much of a sense of urgency to go after a top-tier offensive lineman now that they've signed these guys in free agency. And the wild card I look out for would be Jordan Davis. There's still uncertainty about a return for Stephon Tuitt. So I would be on the lookout for if Jordan Davis is there at 20 and they sit still there at 20. But I think it's going to be quarterback or receiver and for the Steelers. With that, we can get into our second.
Okay. Right. So for this segment, we're just going to be going over the top 10 picks in the draft, what their team needs are, what positions of need that they need to fill, and what their options are based on those team needs, and also whether or not going with the best player available is a better option, and who those players need. So we're just going to be giving a synopsis on all these top 10 teams, starting with do you want to start 10 or 1?
Let's start 1.
Okay, right. So starting with
as the draft.
Right. So starting with the first pick, and that being Jacksonville.
There are two main places.
So
go ahead.
No, you go ahead. You go ahead. Sorry.
For me, two main places you look here for Jacksonville. They went out and had a decently sized free agency spending spree. They had a lot of money to spend, got some decent players there. The two biggest needs to me tackle and edge rusher. I think they could really use an edge rusher to pair with their 2019 first rounder, Josh Allen. Not the Buffalo quarterback, the Jacksonville defensive end who has talent and showed flashes at the end of last year. They just invested heavily in their offense. They have the franchise tag on Cam Robinson. Another offensive lineman, Brandon Scherf, from the Washington football team, to a big deal. And to me, offensive tackle and edge rusher are two places they'd look at this number one pick. And to me, I would lean edge rusher. They need that other guy opposite Josh Allen to beef up. So I think Aiden Hutchinson.
Right. I agree. I think if you want to go with or Neal, I wouldn't be at those picks either. Having as much depth as possible on the offensive line is really important. Given the fact that they really did go actually aggressive in free agency on the offensive side of the ball, you really have to work on that defensive side through the draft. So I think that's the focus. If you look at it, I think you can't go wrong with any of the three of Kayvon Thibodeaux, Aiden Hutchinson, and Trayvon Walker. But the exec at that spot is Aiden Hutchinson, and rightfully so. I think of those three guys, he would have the highest day one impact. He may not necessarily have the highest ceiling. It's very comparable. He's no slouch, that's for sure. But I just think he's the most pro-ready of those three guys.
Okay, so let's move on to Detroit. I think we agree there. They actually have 2 first picks. Remember, they're going to get that 32nd pick that they acquired from the Rams in last year's trade that sent Matthew Stafford to Los Angeles. So they have the pick at the very end of the first round, along with the second pick, their own first round pick. They have a lot of needs. That is why they're picking here. For me, there are a bunch of ways they could go. Number one would just be edge rusher or beefing up that defensive line. I do think there's a chance you could maybe see like a Trayvon Walker go here to Detroit. Wanting to beef up that interior defensive line, that run defense, that pass rush, or on the edge with a guy like Kayvon Thibodeaux. However, I think that's less likely. I do think defensive line is a spot to watch here for Detroit. They were 30th in sacks and dead last in quarterback hits last year, so they do need to improve that area of their team. That would be my first instinct for Detroit, but at the end of the day, I do think it's best player available on their board, in my opinion. I think they reach for a quarterback, a defensive back. I think that's high here. To me, I wouldn't be surprised if they maybe – I don't want to suggest this, but maybe they look to trade back and acquire more draft capital if they don't see a guy that they like right here. I just think there's so many options. But at the end of the day, I don't really see them going offensive tackle because I don't think they need that. Penny, they just drafted him last year. They have another solid left tackle and Decker, unless they just want. But I think the guy draft here has to be able to come in, play for you, and make an impact day one. So I think you look edge rusher or defensive line first, and if not that, maybe a trade back for Detroit, from what I would do if I were their general manager. What do you think?
Right. You hit it right on the head. Edge rusher is definitely the consensus of what people believe the Lions will do here. For me personally, I just think a really fun pick would be Ikem Ekwonu, throw him at guard and just really lean into that knee biter mentality and just be able to just be dominant running the football. That would be really fun. But I also don't think it makes that much sense because that's more of a luxury pick, and they don't really have that luxury at this point in their rebuild. So I think you might want to trade down at this spot. That's where I'm at as well. In terms of getting value, I mean, I think if you trade down to 5, 6, or 7, you can get a guy like a Garner who his nickname is Juice for a reason. I mean, he's incredible. I mean, we talked about those corners out of Cincinnati, but he's unbelievable. He's long, he's lanky, and he affects everything. And his technique is fantastic as well. So I don't know if that would be a great pick at number 2, but if they were to trade down, I think that would be the guy you would go with.
Yeah, I do think trade down is probably the best avenue, but I won't be surprised if they end up going edge rusher, defensive line, that sort of route as well, because they do need help there. Now with Houston at 3, to me, this is the best player available sort of situation. And I do think this is where you're going to see Evan Neal or how do you say his name?
Ike
Ekwonu? Okay.
I think it's Ekwonu, I think.
Tackle from NC State. I do think you're probably going to see one of those two go right here. I think it's just best offensive or defensive linemen they have on their board. They do also have the 13th pick in the first round. They got that from the Browns in the Deshaun Watson trade. So they can attack another position at that spot. But here I think it's smart to go offensive line or defensive line.
Right. I think that's definitely the pick. I think in terms of getting value, the smartest way to go is either a Ikem Ekwonu or Evan Neal. I don't think – I mean, Kayvon Thibodeaux, what would you think of that pick at that spot? Because, I mean, 2 years ago, if you told me that Kayvon Thibodeaux went number 3 to Houston, I would be like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. But it seems like the NFL's view on him has really soured since then. Just a little bit, not too much.
I think of that. He's off the field. I won't be surprised.
I'll stop recording for now, and then I'll get him back in here real quick. Ooh. Okay, sorry for the technical difficulties right there, guys. But anyway, I had just asked Michael about his thoughts on Kayvon Thibodeaux. So go ahead, man.
I was just saying for Houston, I don't think it makes much sense here. I mean, if they view him as that talent that they could use, I mean, I'm not gonna nitpick, but I do think offensive line. You have to be able. We've seen good things from Davis Mills. You have to be able to protect him, and it starts building that wall in front of him. And you have another pick at 13. So I'm not saying you necessarily pick an edge rusher there, but you could go defensive line. You could go corner. You can attack a lot of these other positions of need rather than reach on a guy like Kayvon Thibodeaux, who has his fair share of questions, although his talent is unquestioned. So I just think offensive line and then attack another position of need because you have a lot of them at that 13th spot where you can still get a quality starter, in my opinion.
Right, exactly. Okay, so moving right along to the 4 pick, New York Jets. I think this is where one of the pass rushers go, whether it be Trayvon Walker or Thibodeaux. I think this is too early for a wide receiver. I've seen a lot of mocks have them go with Drake London or Garrett Wilson at 10 if he's still there. But at 4, it's a really interesting spot because you still have a lot of offensive line talent on the board as well. You still have obviously defensive line, like I said, but I don't know. I think this is a wild card pick. I think they could go a lot of different directions here.
Yeah, it is. To me, I wouldn't ultimately be surprised if they maybe reached on a cornerback here. But I don't think that's the smart thing to do because you do have another pick in the top 10 where you could potentially get one of those cornerbacks. That is a position of need for them. Maybe they even look at Kyle Hamilton, the guy from Notre Dame, the safety. But at this position, I do think you're looking at Thibodeaux. They need another pass rusher to pair with Carl Lawson, who's their other defensive end that's recovering from a Achilles injury, which isn't great. So you could get younger and more athletic at that position and go with him. Or, maybe they double down on offensive line, get one of those tackles that are one of them will probably be sitting here. They paired him with Mekhi Becton, who's, I don't think, a lock to be that long-term answer at that position. So there's a lot of directions they could go, but ultimately I see them going edge rusher because I think that's what they need the most.
Right, I agree. And that just makes the most sense at this spot in positional value. Okay, so pick number 5, another New York team, the New York Giants. This is pretty self-explanatory. I think it's offensive line here. Just best lineman available. Doesn't matter if it's tackle, guard, doesn't matter. If Ekwonu is there or at the very slim chance Evan Neal is there, I think either one of those guys, you have to take that. But what do you think?
I agree with you. The group that they have cannot pass protect, and that's the bottom. So they have to be able to, this is it, in my opinion, for Daniel Jones. So you got to be able to put a capable offensive line in front of him. And the only way you're going to do that is by taking top-end offensive line talent high in the draft. So I don't know. They do have another pick, don't they? Maybe not. But yeah, offensive line would be my selection here. But I won't be surprised if they find a way to screw that up.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised either, and I would be pretty welcome to it, to be honest, as a Cowboys fan. But moving on to the number 6 pick with Carolina, who is also another team who's looking at a quarterback possibly. I don't know if they would go with that at this spot, but it is a possibility. I think they also have a high chance of going offensive line as well. You still have a guy like Charles Cross on the board, most likely. You could go receiver also. Garrett Wilson, Drake London. There's a lot of guys there that they could possibly go with. I think it's either offensive line or wide receiver. That's what I'm thinking.
Mm-hmm. I'm taking a quarterback here, but that's just me. There's an interesting stat. Not only have they struggled to find their quarterback since Cam, but in their Sam Darnold situation, but also they've had 7 different left tackles in the past 7 seasons. That is not a recipe for success in the NFL. And I don't care what anyone says. Oh, yeah, a guy like Charles Cross, or maybe if one of the other 2 guys drops down, I do think you're going to see them attack the offensive line. But wide receiver, I think, is probable. It would make sense for them. So I don't know. Like it just depends on who's the top guy, who they view as their top guy on that board at the wide receiver position.
Right. Exactly. I do think that they are a team that likes speed players. So if they're looking at the medicals of a guy like Jameson Williams and they like what they see, they could go with him as well. Considering they have been a team in the past who's valued speed at that wide receiver spot. They've had a lot of different speed players, Curtis Samuel, and a few others that I can't think of their names right now, but you get the point.
Another interesting thing here with the Panthers, they've used just 2 of their last 18 draft picks on offensive linemen. So that explains some of the failures or the lack of competency at that position somewhat for the Panthers. So I do think that's got to be your number one priority. But
exactly,
Matt Rule, David Tepper is an aggressive owner, sort of impulsive in a way, and I won't be surprised if they really like a quarterback, Malik Willis, Kenny Pickett, whoever that may be. I mean, Matt Rule does have connections to Kenny Pickett. He heavily recruited Kenny Pickett back when he was the head coach at Temple. And I know that was before his Baylor days, and that was a long time ago, and Kenny Pickett's a better player now, but it might just be that they're over this. They really need to find that guy at quarterback, and they might reach for that. But I do think you just got to fix. You can't have a house if you don't have a solid foundation, and they don't have a solid foundation right now. So offensive line is the smart investment here. But receiver would also be, that nice new shiny toy.
Right. Exactly. Okay. For the number 7, it's again the New York Giants. 2 picks in 3. 2 out of 3 picks of the last 3. So who do you think they're going with? I think it would be pretty smart for them to double down on offensive line, whether it be a combination of Evan Neal and Ikem Ekwonu, a combination of Charles Cross and Evan Neal or Ikem Ekwonu. One of those combinations, I think it'd be smart for them to double down. And if not, you can maybe go with a corner, Derek Stingley Jr. There's a lot of questions about him considering he had some injury trouble this season, but in 2020, I believe he had one of the best cornerback seasons you could possibly have, and especially given the fact that he was going against some of the best receivers in the country at LSU. So interesting prospect there as well. Worth considering.
Yeah, I do think if they're really smart about this, they double invest that offensive line. I wouldn't potentially rule out a defensive lineman in this scenario, but I think it'd be smart to go corner. Sauce Gardner would probably be sitting right here if they wanted to go that direction.
Right.
Or another guy like Stingley Jr., who of course has his questions. So yeah, secondary or offensive line, I think would be ideal for the Giants. They don't really need receiver talent. I don't think they're looking in that direction. I think it's if a defensive lineman falls that they like and they had an opportunity to beef up on that side of the ball as well, I wouldn't be surprised. But offensive line and secondary, should be the concerns here for me with the Giants.
Right. I also think if they like what they see in a guy like Jermaine Johnson II, he could be an option as well because he really showed out at the Senior Bowl as well. We've talked about him before. He's a fantastic prospect out of Florida State, a guy who actually was at Georgia, but since that defensive line room was so deep, he actually had to transfer out. That's how good that defensive line room was.
Right. Okay. Atlanta. Interesting here at 8. What do you think they're going to do at 8?
Well, right now their number one wide receiver is Olamide Zaccheaus. So I think number one priority might be wide receiver. But if you want to go defense here, I wouldn't be too against it. But at some point, you got to answer the questions at wide receiver. And I think this would be a perfect spot to do it because most likely you're going to get the number one wide receiver available, and that's Garrett Wilson, a guy who was actually from just down the road from us, from where we went to high school at Lake Travis. He has amazing ball skills. I don't know what it would look like next to Marcus Mariota, but I think just finding your wide receiver one for the future is extremely important, whether it be Marcus Mariota or some other quarterback throwing it to him.
Right. We talk about it all the time. This has become a weapons league, a quarterback weapons league, and you got to have the requisite weapons to supplement the quarterback. Right now, they don't have that. They need a receiver. They got a great tight end, young generational talent in Kyle Pitts. That's sort of the bright spot right now in this offense. Olamide Zaccheaus is a guy I watched a lot of at Virginia. He's sort of that possession down receiver that you can use on third downs across the middle, but he's not that burner. They need that fast number one type guy. They're really missing that. So I believe they do still have Cordell Patterson. Is that right?
Right. They re-signed him as well.
So that helps, but he's more of a utility guy. So they still need that burner type guy. So I think take the best receiver available at this spot, and it might be that it's the best receiver in the draft, Garrett Wilson. So
right, exactly. Okay, 9th pick. Moving pretty quickly here. Seattle, who had a extremely eventful offseason. They're in this spot from the Russell Wilson trade. This is actually Denver's pick. But with Seattle, I think it's just best player available. I don't think anyone at this spot is going to somehow be able to salvage and make this team good. I think it's going to be a struggle no matter what. So I think trading down would be a good option. I think there's a good chance that there will be plenty of teams looking to trade up to the spot because this is one of those spots that's really, I think, might be a good spot for a quarterback. Right around number 9, 10, 11, that's normally when teams take their chance and go up and get a guy. We saw that last year with Justin Fields. We've seen it before with Patrick Mahomes going at 10 and Deshaun going at 12. So I think this might be a spot to trade down. And if not, best player available, either offense or defense, doesn't really matter. I think the one position that wouldn't really make sense is wide receiver. So I think defensive line probably would be the way to go here.
Yeah, for me, and you're absolutely right. I think they view it differently just because of the success that they've had over the past half decade or so. I do think for whatever reason they really believe in Drew Lock. I don't, but I think they do more than at least the outside viewer does. So I do not think quarterback is going to be the move here. I agree with you there, despite what some people may think. I think they got to get back to what they were, and that is while you wait, and this season's probably gonna be a struggle in that division with like the Rams and the Cardinals being potential playoff teams. Same with the 49ers. Um, yeah, this season's gonna be a struggle no matter who you draft. And they didn't really add all that much in free agency. It's got to be best player available, get back to that Seattle identity, uh, build up that defense, the secondary, and that defensive pass rush, whoever that may be. And if you don't see value here, I agree with you. Trade down and get more value, more later picks where you can still find starters. But to me, it's just finding guys that you can plug and play for Seattle day one and start to develop. And that doesn't need to be a quarterback. You can wait till next year to go and get that guy. Next year is a better quarterback draft class. And with the way this season is looking, you probably will be able to get maybe, you'll be up there in the top 5-6 picks and you can go get one of those guys next year. That can be your next franchise quarterback. But for now, get back to what Seattle was when they were at their peak. Power running football team, a good enough quarterback, and a dominant defense with a dominant secondary. That's what they need to be, especially with Pete Carroll as their coach.
Right.
Which, to me, it doesn't look like that's changing anytime soon. So,
right.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Okay, so last pick here is going to be the New York Jets with another top 10 pick. This one from Seattle. I think a really interesting spot for me, at least, would be to go with a guy like Drake London, who really fits Zach Wilson's style in terms of that guy who can go get a jump ball in the red zone. Was really good on back shoulder fade. We saw that a lot from Zach Wilson in college. And I think Zach Wilson really needs that guy to where he can get back to his playing style that he's most comfortable with. And I think that's definitely something really important that they need to address is the fact that Zach Wilson really looked very uncomfortable. So just adding a big-bodied receiver to just have a safety blanket, basically, almost like a tight end, but on the outside. Just someone you can look to in the red zone on back shoulder fades, someone you can give a 50-50 ball to and be confident that he's going to go get it.
Yeah, I didn't even think about it that way. That does make a lot of sense, the way the style of Zach Wilson would fit in with a guy like Drake London, how those two would complement each other. I do think it's receiver or cornerback at this position for the Jets. It's just whatever they feel is more valuable at this position. They do have the 35th pick and the 38th pick early on in the second round. So, and we know the depth at receiver here. So they could wait to go get a receiver then. But if they want one of the top tier guys, they're going to have to go with receiver here at 10. If not, I could definitely see them going cornerback, whether that's Sauce Gardner or Derek Stingley Jr., because they need to look at beefing up that secondary. So
Right.
I think it's one of those two positions.
Right. I think it could be those two guys, but if they're off the board, I think Trent McDuffie could be a good option as well. And this also might be a spot for Kyle Hamilton also. I'm not as high on Kyle Hamilton as most people in terms of I don't know if he's going to give you that positional value if you take him high in the draft, but here at the 10 spot, I think that's right around where I would take him.
Right. So, yeah, that's sort of the overview of the top 10 picks of the draft. I think what we'll do, we haven't discussed this yet. We'll do sort of what we did last year, I guess, for our next episode, where we get together, we do our mock draft like we did last year,
Right.
or we sort of, I don't know, we'll figure it out, and then we'll come on the podcast and we'll talk about each pick. So it'll be our full first round mock draft, which I think was a pretty fun episode last year. So we'll do that. Might even talk about some other stuff. Who knows? But that will be the majority of next episode. But with that, I think that's going to do it for today's episode.
Right. Okay. Yeah. That's it, y'all. So again, I'll just remind you to like, subscribe, and if you enjoyed, please leave a like. That would really help us out. And if you're interested in bonus content from us, we do have a Patreon. It's patreon.com/Raw Prospect Podcast, and it'll also be in the description below, a link to that. So if you want to go check that out and see some of the bonus content we have, it would only take $1 a month. So thanks for considering that, and I'll leave it to Michael to sign us off.
Yes, and be sure to follow both of us on Twitter, not only at Raw Prospect Pod, but also at Emmy_Nixon and at Michael_Weed1. Be sure to follow both of us on Twitter because we will start promoting the podcast on those accounts as well. So you can find it there as well. But with all that being said, thanks for listening. Like, subscribe, do everything. And I guess just like the Suns' margin for error, with Devin Booker going down with injury tonight, we are gone.
Peace out.
Peace out.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed that video, make sure to click on one of these two videos right here, our latest video right here on the left, or the video YouTube recommends for you on the right.